Let's take a full paragraph and see if we can turn that into a algebraic expression. So when you have a paragraph like this, the first thing that you do is you want to do what is called defining your variables. And so defining your variables means we're going to go through this problem on our first pass, our first read through this problem, and we're going to see if we can identify what are the values, what are the amounts that we don't know? Because the values that we don't know are going to be our variables. A variable represents a changing value or an unknown value. So let's read through the problem. Let's find the things that we don't know. So it says Mr. Martinez orders 250 keychains printed with his athletic team's logo and 500 pencils printed with their web address. Write an algebraic expression that represents the cost of the order. So, in order to figure out the cost of the order, I need to know how much each one of these items costs. Meaning, I need one variable that represents the keychain cost and another variable that represents the pencil cost. So this problem is going to have two variables. Variable number one is going to be the cost of a keychain. Whatever that cost ends up being, we multiply by 250 to figure out how much he spent on keychains, since it says he orders 250 keychains. The second thing that we need to know is the cost of a pencil. It says he orders 500 pencils, so we take whatever the cost of a pencil is and multiply by 500. That will tell us how much he spends just on pencils. Once we know the cost of all the keychains, the cost of all 250 is 250 keychains. We then add the cost of 500 pencils, and that will give us the cost of the order. Okay, so we need two variables. We need one that represents the cost of a keychain and one that represents the cost of a pencil. By default, I think a lot of people use X and Y as their variables just because we're used to using X and Y when we graph. But there's no reason to use X and Y unless you're going to graph it. Let's use variables that make a little more sense in this problem. The cost of a keychain, instead of using X or Y, let's just use K for keychain. So let's make this variable K. And then the cost of a pencil, let's do something similar. Instead of using X or Y for the cost of a pencil, let's use P for pencil. So the cost of one keychain is K. We don't know how much it is, which is why we're using a variable. And the cost of one pencil is P. We also don't know how much that is, which is why we're using a variable. But what we do know is that if we take our 250 keychains and we multiply by our variable K, that tells us how much we spent on all 250 keychains together. If we take our 500 pencils and we multiply that by how much one pencil costs, our variable P, that will tell us the total amount spent on pencils. And if we add these two things together, that would give us the total cost of the order. So this first part right here, this is the cost of all the pencils. And the second part, 500, oh, sorry, I did pencils and I meant keychains. See, this is why it's important to use K for your variable. As soon as I looked up and saw that K, I was like, wait, pencil doesn't start with K. I'm not an English expert, but I'm pretty sure pencil does not start with K. Over here, we've got 500p. This is the cost of all pencils. See, that little mess up is a perfect illustration of why we shouldn't use X and Y. If I'd used X and Y, I wouldn't have realized that I was writing the wrong item under my variable. So cost of all the keychains plus the cost of all the pencils. And that right there is our expression. Our final answer, our expression that represents the total cost is 250K plus 500P. There it is. So when you're doing these problems and you get a paragraph of information, the very first thing you do is just read the problem all the way through without writing anything down. Just read the problem and then go back and ask, okay, in that problem, what things need to be variables? Meaning, what are the values that I do not know? You may have been tempted in this problem to say, oh, well, I don't know the cost of the order. We could have used a third variable for cost of the order. We could have said something like the cost of the order is, let's say, C for cost or T for total, whichever you like. And then we could have just said 250K plus 500P equals C, and that would have been totally fine too. So we could have used a third variable for total cost. There's nothing wrong with that. But the two variables we really needed was the cost of one keychain and the cost of one pencil. Once we know those two things, we have enough information to tell the total cost just by using addition.